Clarence Melvin Krammes was born on April 10, 1922, in Rock, Pennsylvania. He is 90 years old. Mr. Krammes is an Army Air Corps veteran from World War II. He is married to Rose Krammes, and they have been together for about 70 years. He lives in Fredericksburg, PA. Before Mr. Krammes decided to enlist in the Army Air Corps, he worked as an Air Force instrument mechanic at the Holton Air Force Base in Holton, Maine. He decided he wanted to be an air cadet in the Army Air Corps in 1943. Mr. Krammes wanted to be in the Air Corps because he worked on military aircraft. When he enlisted, he had planned on becoming a pilot, but looking back, he is thankful he was assigned to be a waist gunner instead of a pilot. Mr. Krammes had 3 brothers. All of them were also involved in the military.
Two brothers were in the Navy. And I had another brother who was in the Air Force, and he was in the 8th Air Force as well as I was, and he went down on his first mission. And he was on a B-17, and he was taken captive, and he was a prisoner of war, I think, for about 8 months.
Mr. Krammes had no idea this happened to his brother, but was so grateful he lived. The experience of basic training for Mr. Krammes, from what he can remember, is that it was cold. He actually had a cold, but the leaders made him stay in basic training, and he remembers the sergeant in charge, Sergeant Dupre.
Well, the basic training was done at Greensboro, North Carolina. And naturally, it was a new experience when you get into basic training. And I guess I remember probably 2 things. One was it was cold. And I caught a cold, but they wouldn't put you in the infirmary unless you were really cold. So you had to continue with your basic training. And I remember our sergeant who was in charge, Sergeant Dupre, and whatever he demanded that you do, that's what we had to do.
After basic training, he had to take a series of tests to become an air cadet. Mr. Krammes had no idea why, but he didn't pass the test. But the Air Corps needed gunners because so many were shot down. They told him he flunked the test and sent him to Laredo, Texas for gunnery school. The main thing Mr. Krammes remembers about this experience is that a woman was flying the plane to Texas back in 1943. He was trained in 2 different types of gunnery, waist gunner and nose gunner. As a waist gunner, he was on the left side, and he was positioned between the bomb bay, where all the bombs were hooked, and the tail. As a nose gunner, he was in the front of the plane, and his job was to toggle the bombs off his plane after he saw the lead plane toggle their bombs. According to him, being in the nose was the scariest position he had ever been in because he could see the flak and fighter planes in front of him, and he couldn't change the route of the plane.
Well, I was a waist gunner and a nose gunner. And I was on the left side of the waist as a waist gunner. Now I'd have to show you what a waist gunner is. It's between what we would call the bomb bay and the tail. The bomb bays where all the bombs were hooked. And it's a section between the bomb bay and the tail. Then I was also assigned on 7 missions to be a nose gunner. Now that's a turret in the front of a plane. And there, at that time, they no longer put a bombardier on a craft. This bombardier had bailed out over Holland. And so in a sense, I took his place, and some of them called us toggleers, if you want to call it that. Now, a toggler in the nose of the plane had to watch when the leader of the bomb group dropped the bombs. And when you saw the bombs drop, as a toggler, there was a toggle switch in the nose. And when the nose gunner saw the bombs dropped by the lead bomber, then you toggled the switch and we dropped our bombs.
A typical day at North Pickingham Base in East Anglia, England, started when they were woken up at 3 in the morning and had to eat breakfast. After breakfast, they would meet in the briefing room, where the officer would explain what their route mission was, how much flak might be shot up, and if they would come across any German fighter planes. Mr. Krammes stayed at North Pickingham his whole time in the Air Corps. An average mission for him was anywhere between 5 hours to 9.5 hours.
We would be called at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Then we'd go to breakfast. And after breakfast, we would go to what was called a briefing room. And in that room, there'd be some military Air Force officer who would explain to us where the mission would be, what route we would take, where we might possibly confront a lot of flak from the German 88 millimeters, or at places where we might meet German aircraft. In other words, they were alerting to the individuals going on the mission what they might anticipate in terms of how high we would fly, where we might meet flak, where we might meet fighters. They would also tell us at what altitude we would fly and the prospective time that the mission would last to return home. That was a day, a typical day for an Air Force individual who was going on a mission.
Mr. Krammes was affected by his brother's captivity when he himself was in trouble on his 18th mission. One of the plane's engines and propeller was not working to expected standards. This is what is called a runaway prop, and it was uncontrollable. When a pilot rang the bailout bell, Mr. Krammes thought about himself being a prisoner of war and thought about his parents getting another missing in action letter.
I think it was on our 18th mission when we were coming back from a mission over Magdeburg, Germany. One of the engines malfunctioned and the propeller didn't function as it should. And it's called a runaway prop, and the pilot couldn't control it. And so we dropped down, I don't know how many thousand feet. And the pilot rang the bell, which is a signal for all of us to get out of there, bail out. And when I was ready to bail out, the other waist gunner got behind me with the straps to hold me back. And he said, I think the pilot's going to control the plane. But when I was ready to bail out, there was one thought in my mind. Here's another letter to my parents, missing in action. But thank goodness, only 2 bailed out of our aircraft.
Bailing out of the plane at any altitude was dangerous. The main risks of bailing out were freezing to death, getting shot down before reaching the ground, landing and being taken a prisoner of war, or getting caught in the propellers of other planes. Even though his squadron had few milk runs, they also had a lot of hard missions as well. Every mission was different, but thankfully he was never in contact with any German fighters. A mission was considered difficult when there was going to be an obstruction like flak or fighters. Fighters were the most dangerous, but flak did damage too. Flak is an aircraft fire. It was stored in a metal shell and then exploded in the air and tore through anything it touched. Flak was threatening and fierce, and the Germans were really good at figuring out where the American planes were and what direction they were going. The only injury he had was when the Germans shot 20 millimeters at the crew and flak was shot into his face. He was bleeding profusely but survived. After he was hit, the tail gunner thought he was shot through the head. He still has few small scars on his cheek and a piece left in his chin and cheek. He was also awarded the Purple Heart, an award given to any wounded soldier. Seeing injuries was uncommon for Mr. Krammes, but he did see the quartermaster get hit high in both legs. The most difficult mission for Mr. Krammes and his crew was his fifth mission. The original plan was to fly over Holland and drop supplies to support the troops at the market garden. They had no bombs and were flying low. This caused them to be easy targets for the Germans. Every crew member except the pilot, co-pilot, and engineer were hit by shrapnel. The pilot decided to fly them higher so that they could bail out, so they changed routes and went over the English Channel at its narrowest point and were met by more Nazis in Dunkirk. They hit them with 88 millimeters. This pretty much injured everyone on the plane. By the time they got over the channel, they were on fire and had no hydraulics to control their crash landing, and they were almost out of gas. They crash landed in a field at Springfield Royal Air Force Base. Gratefully, they all made it out of the plane and didn't blow up like the other B-24s they could see.
I think the most difficult one was our fifth mission. We were supposed to fly over Holland. It was called the Market Garden Project, or mission. And what we were supposed to do was to drop supplies. We didn't have bombs that day. We had all supplies in the bombardment plane, part of our plane. And we came in around 600 feet. We were accustomed to flying at around 22,000 feet. So we came in around 600 feet to drop the supplies to some of our military who were encircled by the Germans, and we were to drop supplies to them. And of course, when you come in at 600 feet with a big plane like that, you're a big target. And that's when we really got shot up. And all of us, with the exception of the pilot, the co-pilot, and the engineer, were all hit by shrapnel. Because they used 20 millimeters, the Germans used 20 millimeters to shoot at us. So we were a kind of a crippled bomber. And the pilot tried to go a little higher because we were so low, if we'd have to bail out, we'd never make it. So he decided we would go across the English Channel at the narrowest point. And we came close to a place called Dunkirk. And here the Nazis were in this particular area. For some reason they held out there for a long time. So when we were about to cross the channel, they let us have it too, with 88 millimeters. Well, by that time, all of us were injured practically. Everybody. And this Wilson, the tail gunner, the one who wrote this account, he started firing back at these guys and their machine gun tower, I think they called it, at Dunkirk. Well, we finally made it across the channel. And after we were on fire already. And we didn't have any hydraulics to control the landing gear. We were running out of gas. So the pilot felt he'd do the best he could. And so we crash landed at Swing Field, RAF, Royal Air Force Field. And when we hit the ground, we spun all around. Because the pilot had no control of the plane. And we all tried to get out of exits wherever the closest one we could get out of. And there was a quartermaster man with us. He was not a member of the crew. But because we had supplies with us, a quartermaster man was made available in every bomber that was carrying supplies. So we were sitting at what we called a bulkhead, which we were taught that if you're going to crash, sit against that bulkhead. Well, we sat against that bulkhead, but the quartermaster man, he was hit pretty hard. So when we exited the plane, we tried to help him out, which we did. We wanted to give him morphine because we always carried morphine if there was a serious injury to deaden the pain. But he refused to take it. But nevertheless, we all got out of the plane, which was another miracle, because we saw many B-24s, when they crashed, they blew up, or they caught on fire, and the crews couldn't get out. So we were lucky in that respect, that we made it across the channel, and that, when we landed, we didn't blow up.
Along with the Purple Heart, he was awarded the Air Medal and the Good Conduct Medal. The Air Medal was given out after the 5th mission. Mr. Krammes was awarded the Air Medal along with the 5 oak leaf clusters. He was given the Good Conduct Medal because he was never in trouble. After Mr. Krammes was discharged in 1945, he joined the American Legion and has been a member ever since. He also had the chance to go to college, funded by the government, at Millersville. Mr. Krammes went to college for the field of education, and he was a high school principal at North Lebanon. The Army Air Corps taught him responsibility. Well, it's an individual choice to make, but I wouldn't tell them not to. But I think it's a worthwhile experience because you learn responsibility and you learn how to get along with other people in difficult situations, Mr. Krammes said in his advice to young people. He was very happy with his decision to join the Air Corps, and we are all very thankful he did. Thank you, Mr. Krammes, for being a veteran of World War II.